Rain. Rain is falling. She looks down briefly, only to see that the hand is covered in blood. Straining her ears, she could hear ragged breathing. A body frozen like ice, and her head frighteningly blank. Rain? Rain. It's rain. A body threatening to vanish, her reason threatening to collapse. The sky she looks up at is high. She calls for help and receives none, and the fading body grows ever colder. Oh, but tonight is different. Her magical energy is running out. There are few spells at her disposal, and none to secure a vanishing life with. No, to begin with, because the night when the cold rain fell was warmer and filled with light. His death was nearly instant. This is the story of one man. It begins about 25 years back. The story of a lethal weapon that was tempered for nearly as long as he lived. He did not know what that group was right until the very end. In the middle of secluded mountains, amidst a community that gathered and lived together like mountain ascetics, he came into existence. Without parents or siblings, he was born as a child with no connections whatsoever. It might be more accurate to call it an emergence rather than a birth. The baby grew up in the midst of that gathering. Fortunately, he was pure, even though that wasn't much of a place for living. Even though that probably wasn't how people lived. He who knew not of the outside world accepted that gathering. 20 years since then. He did not leave his allotted 10 square meters of forest and continued to temper the one technique he was bestowed with. Around the age of 10, he was told that the community was a factory. A place where the necessities of daily life are mass-produced through the work of many. Since he had no experience in creating things, he didn't have to wonder which side he was on. He had no objection to the fact that he was a daily necessity. Instead, you could probably say he was relieved. It would have been strange otherwise. All day long, he single-mindedly repeated the same steps. No need for variety. Just perfect this one action, said the... That's the same as being a tool. They consented to the fact they were tools being used by total strangers and further polished their function. To put it another way, those unable to come to terms were grief-stricken, became unable to keep up with their daily work, and disappeared even from the memories of the tools. It was shortly after that when he guessed his own function. Extra knowledge was driven into them for when the time came. Daily necessities though they may be, they had to become pseudo-humans to manifest their function. The knowledge necessary to function as a human. While considered an excess, it was rare for them to be used without that knowledge. Although it would seem the were against including extra functions, it was something unavoidable. To him and to the... it was no doubt an agonizing decision. Knowledge that he hadn't been taught until then. Things that are common knowledge for a human, things that would make him inconsistent if learned. It was only that way to slow him down. However, thanks to that knowledge, he learned the name of his function. Murderer. To be detected by no one, to kill the victim before they are even aware of it, that was the function expected of him. Being a fast learner, he left his 10 square meters of forest and came to serve more frequently at the court. But even that happened only once a month or so. There he learned of the cost of perfection and the appearance of the who were using him. The court was an immaculately clean place. The building where demons were said to live, the place rumored to be a hellish pandemonium, was in fact a spotless white world. The scraps of tools that didn't listen to the and were disassembled while alive. and the remnants of those who brought shame to and had their brains transplanted into animals as punishment, and the fish tanks packed with flesh of the children who were gathered for the comfort of nothing. None of it was there. Those were all things that certainly happened, but they had nothing to do with this place, in this pure space, having known not one speck of guilt, as an ineffective form of staving of boredom, aiming for nothing but the expansion of tonight's menu by a mouthful, exchange completely unrelated human lives for money. Please, save me. I don't want to die. Please let me go. Those pleas were to be all laughed off as filthy and silenced. And so, without the even noticing, the once exploited realized something in their final moments. Those humans were speaking a different language all along. They were both living beings, yet their hearts were created differently. Things like the voice of the dishes lined up along the dinner table did not exist to them. To the voice of other humans would never in a lifetime reach them. This is not a matter limited to just their court. Thus said the ones who oversaw him. Those are the privileged few who use us tools. This world is governed by humans who are not humans. He was told his function was to kill just one person for them. He didn't think that was evil. Mentally, he was already perfect. His morality was bred for the convenience of the... To him, murder was not evil. If anything was evil, then it was actions that were not logical. The logic of a tool. The logic of existence. Simply put, if an ink brush loses its use, then that is evil. If something made for killing people overlooks its target, that is injustice. If you put it this way, we're not doing anything wrong. They were creatures that had been given such preferences and privileges to begin with. If they cared about their slaves, then the reasoning by which the world was managed would not stand. And that is how he was taught. While he witnessed the cruelty, he did not detest them. If there was something evil, it was just one thing. Do not doubt to one's own function. That should have been what was correct for him, yet for some reason he still thought about it. What if he were to be given a function altogether different from this one? He thought of things that could be nothing but evil, like what kind of tool he would then have become. Towards his function, his daily routine continued. The art bestowed upon him was a fighting style called Snake, but he perfected it many years ago. Nevertheless, his daily routine did not change. No new techniques would be given to him. He was simply created as a snake tool. However much capacity he had, there would be no meaning in adding other functions. And like that, another 10 years passed, and he reached the 20th. Finally, nearing his expiration date as a tool, he was given a chance to exert his potential.
お前の完成には2000万の金と時間がかかっている。
If there was anything different there from other organizations, that would be it. No matter what type of tool they were, no matter what kind of function they had, a one-man, one-kill rule was strictly observed. The exact same end awaited both outstanding talent and average junk.
2000万かけて育てた道具は2000万の仕事をすればよい。
Profits will be taken. You will not be used twice. Kill yourself after fulfilling your duty. Those were their absolute rules. Order to kill this person, he underwent training beyond human comprehension, and then, having finally perfected the technique after tens of years of practice, he will display it only once before putting an end to everything. He obeyed in silence. It was said the target laid out layer upon layer of defenses. The social position necessary for smoothly making contact would be provided by the... After that, he just had to proceed with his body alone. Proceeding empty-handed was done solely to make it easier to make contact with a key individual. When they leave the forest, they are promised death. A journey to die, regardless of their success or failure. Feelings of happiness, frankly, they were likely there, however faint. setting a balance of 20 years, finding out the extent of his function. Even if the outcome was death, that was still plenty to look forward to. The work ended all too quickly. There were none of the expected guards or barriers. When he visited the building to do preliminary inspections for the real thing, he ended up finishing his job. The emotions of that moment were not easy to put into words. What came flying into his chest was nothing. Neither joy nor sadness. Neither disgust nor happiness. Shouldn't there be something? He thought his function would be accompanied by some emotion, but not a single ripple disturbed his mind. If only. Suppose something did move within him at that moment, wouldn't that make him a different being altogether? If there was happiness, then on to the suicide. If there was sadness, then on to being a natural-born killer. But there had been nothing. Feelings and so forth, there were none whatsoever in the fruits of the technique he spent 20 years tempering. There was neither pleasure nor discomfort when he killed. Only the feeling of the puppet-like target's neck breaking was left in the palm of his hand. There was no reward. Nor was there compensation. The shock of taking a person's life was nowhere to be found. Even his function itself seemed strange. Didn't need it. It was completely unnecessary. The murder of this target required no technique whatsoever. It was more like an accident. A level of difficulty that needed no training, an assassination that kids in the neighborhood could have performed. It was all excessive. How on earth could something like 20 years of training have been needed? His function that was left with nothing. The pilgrimage that was of no meaning to begin with. It's not that doubts had surfaced. There was probably no reason. There was no reason in anything. Before the corpse that he only knew the name of, he became aware of his usual apathetic self.
乾いているな。
Drawing that conclusion himself, he then decided to liquidate the person he was up until then. He did not commit suicide, but instead withdrew from the gathering and became independent. He did not even think about the option of going underground and hiding himself. He quite naturally moved to a faraway town and used the social position that was given to him for fulfilling his function. The personality prepared for him was one of a teacher, but he was able to master the basic knowledge and skills somehow. He had no difficulty adjusting to his new role, his completely different life. But there was just one trivial matter bothering him. Like a small thorn stuck in the recesses of his mind. He did not realize what that strange feeling was until the very end. The life that he did not assume would continue for more than half a year, in fact has continued for 5 years. There were none that searched for him, and he himself decided that he would live without regard for his pursuers. It was not that he yearned for a normal life. In the 20 years he lived, he only polished his technique for killing. If the result were something like that, then all that remained was to disappear without accomplishing anything more, he concluded. In short, he had lost the opportunity to find joy in life. Humans spend the rest of their lives fulfilling the hopes they've accumulated up until adulthood. Whether or not they are fulfilled is not the issue. They are, in fact, an anesthesia that can expend time originally filled with nothing but agony. He, who had none of this, could only continue on meaninglessly. He had neither ideals nor illusions. He decided he would fulfill the duty of living until his own flesh would rot away, until the tool known as himself ceased to work. That would seem to make him a cold-hearted machine, but he was a human no different from those around him. It's just that his inspiration had died. What is dead does not revive. It is not that it's sleeping in the depths of his heart or that it's regressed or anything. It just doesn't exist anymore. No matter how human-like a life he tries to live, he will never in his life feel inspiration. He never thought it to be painful, and the people around him assumed he was strong too. There is nothing wrong with that assumption. But he did make an effort to rot away meaninglessly like this. With his dead heart, he walked the path of hell and endeavored to live among humans. And then he met that pale woman. He was returning home after finishing the day's work. As he was heading towards the temple gate, he caught sounds coming from the forest. Having been indebted to the temple, he took it as his obligation to see what was going on, and he found a woman covered in blood. The woman wrapped in the black cloak was so weak that it seemed she would disappear at any moment. She seemed so frail that the word vanish rather than die would be more fitting to describe her appearance. Later on, the witch would think. This meeting was a miracle. But the thought was not hers alone. Even if it were an illusion, the impossible happened. The heart that had beat at the same rhythm for tens of years had stopped for just an instant. The interruption had but a minor effect, but it did change the beat. Something that should have been dead trembled as if to stir.
そこで何をしている?
The woman collapsed without responding to his call. Forest in the night, rain, a weakened body, clearly not a decent person. Trivial matters, including a cloak covered in blood. This woman is dangerous. Even if he tried to distance himself from it, he was out of place as well. There was no way he couldn't pick up the scent of one who was the same as him. But still, he looked after the woman. It was not out of sympathy for someone similar, a fellow murderer that he saved. He helped because a person had collapsed before him. The reason why he saved her was simply that. The woman awoke in about an hour.
起きたか? 事情は話せるか?
The woman stared at him, dazed. There was neither bewilderment nor delight. She looked as if her despair of being alive had turned to tears and were about to spill forth.
迷惑だったのなら帰るがいい。忘れろというなら忘れよ。
How did the woman take his words? Did she think she could use him, or did she let her guard down at his kindness? The woman divulged her background, and he all too quickly accepted her rather peculiar identity. He embraced the woman and also acknowledged participation in the killings known as the Holy Grail War. Of course, the witch was probably surprised too. The woman's condition was, although slightly, improving. Because while she gloated that she could have, the moment she were rejected, used magic to control his heart. Her vile schemes were undone with just a single statement. It's not that he consented to her out of fear, or that he was interested in the Holy Grail. He cooperated with the woman because she had asked for his help. He was a man who saw no evil in murder to begin with. He had no reluctance to becoming a master. However, the truth is that he cooperated to distance himself from the past. If you assume there was a moment of disconnection, then this would be it. He did not realize why he had abandoned the life he had worked for until now and taken up the woman's cause.
極力、今の生活を乱さないようにしろ。手が欲しいときは言え。
This was his policy. He has no desires. It was just that the woman he saved wants something called the Holy Grail. If he fights, then it is not for the Holy Grail, but for the woman. Since he promised to aid and cooperate, lending his strength to the woman is a natural obligation. To him, the Holy Grail War was an abnormality, but it was not a wrongdoing. Because to him, evil is defined as something that negates his established function. And so he became the master of Castor. He was a master without command spells, but she obeyed his words. He knew nothing like magic to begin with. She only used him to stay in this world and planned to treat him as a puppet. And he himself did not participate in the Holy Grail War. Rather, he left the fighting to the woman. If there ever was a chance that he would reject her, it would only happen if she denied the Holy Grail War to begin with. As the user and the used, their relationship was perfect. Yet, for the same reason, they did not mesh together as human beings. The more the woman began to change her mind, the more of a reason he had to abandon being a master. And the more he experienced her character, the more he broke down as a tool. That sense of nostalgia. He, who had no place to return to begin with, could not possibly understand it. No, it was an emotion he should not have understood. Whoa, Gilgamesh! He fought against Gilgamesh? Where did that happen? The battle ended quickly. The gatekeeper, assassin, was defeated by the enemy servant, and the master who went out to face him, too, was defeated by the rain of swords. His abdomen was cruelly torn apart. The arms he spent over 20 years tempering vanished below his shoulders.
Master! Master!
The woman's voice echoed in the temple grounds. The enemy servants seemed to have left, having finished with the servant and master of the temple gate. Only the woman was left, clinging to the remains of her pallid contractor. With eyes that had lost focus, barely able to discern silhouettes, he looked at her. Seeing that crying face, he found himself lamenting over having done something inexcusable. It was not an illusion that his fading consciousness was showing him. His heart, that should not have existed, shed blood on the verge of death. The woman wished to return home. The idea of a place to return to did not exist for him. A repeated sense of nostalgia. A place he'd never seen nor heard of, a dream of a paradise that he did not even have an impression of to begin with. That he did not know how to take in even in his last moments.
ここから離れろキャスター。お前の気配を察すれば、今のサーバントが戻ってくる。
He said indifferently. Condition of his body aside, it was a miracle that his spirit was still in good health. Perhaps it was the result of his long days of training. Until the moment his brain stopped working, his mind was clear.
何を言うのです。気を確かに必ず直します。あなたを死なせはしません、マスター。
The woman didn't leave. It was a bit illogical. Of course, losing a master to anchor to is a serious blow, but not to the extent that it would result in death. In fact, she had already lost one before. Considering the possibility of being attacked by the same servant again, it would have been best to leave as quickly as possible and search for another master.
見くびらないで。私は魔女です。死にかけの人間の一人や二人、簡単に作られる。
A miracle would not happen. The magical energy stockpiled in a Ryudo temple had been destroyed by the enemy servant, and the injuries were inflicted with a mortality curse by their noble phantasm.
簡単。こんなの何度だってやってきたことなんだから。失敗なんてしない。失敗なんてしない。失敗なんてしない。こんな簡単な治療、手こずったことなんて一度もない。
Whilst crying, the woman recited magic as if apologizing. But it was no use, even the divine words she spoke had lost their usual power. The woman's face filled with more sadness with each passing moment.
やだ。助けて。誰かお願い。お願い。助けて。助けてよ。こんなの嘘よ。今まで 今まで失敗したことなんてただの一度もなかったのに。
Neither healing the wounds nor regenerating his body was fast enough. She could not save anything. A witch's role is only to cripple humans. Even if she could cure people and animate the dead, genuinely saving a person was simply not possible. Perhaps it was because she hadn't really tried to save anyone up until now. She had not known of that rule until this very moment. Magic did not work. She called for help, but no aid ever came. The sky she looked up at was high, and she could not stop his falling body temperature.
死なないで死なないで死なないで死なないで宗一郎
He hears wailing. Looking at her crying face gives him a headache. He realizes that this is because of sadness, and finally accepted that he could not become a tool. He just thought to live normally. When he murdered a person and became free, he accordingly took up the view that the rest of his life could only be spent away. What a blatant lie. He dared not admit it, but he actually regretted that. He always kept in his heart those meaningless 20 years and the person he'd killed whom he had only known by name. He always thought it was wrong to kill someone who he knew only the name of. That was not a killing born from his own motives. He was not an adult born from his own will. How should he have atoned for his mistake? It had been fun. It was easy to do nothing but hone one single technique to forget about thinking and be a tool. Being preoccupied with that, he erased 2 lives without a single consideration. Is there any evil greater than this? Even if those who raised him were to shoulder a part of his crime. Even if he didn't know a thing. What killed another person was, inevitably, his own hands. The reason why he went on to live was because he didn't know how to atone. He stopped practicing the technique that he could call his one and only purpose and slowly buried it within his daily life. Wishing for nothing, gaining nothing. That was the best form of atonement he could conceive in his mind. That way of living crumbled after meeting this woman. A pale-looking lady wandering about in the cold rain. She was simply beautiful. More beautiful than any woman he had seen before. That was the only reason. To that beautiful creature he reached out his hand. Looking back on it, throwing away all those days of atonement he had accumulated and lending her a hand was surely... The woman's voice had turned into a cry. What he thought was rain was something much warmer. The woman did not leave. Just as that night, arms covered in blood clung to his chest. It is truly sad that he could not see her face anymore, he thought.
そうか。ようやく気がついた。
It took too long, but still, there was some time. He had for a long time wanted to apologize to something. Things he had regretted. Something he had to beg for forgiveness. Since long ago. To that which he had vaguely carried until now. He had wanted to live for someone's sake. To that pure longing.
キャスター。
That woman would not leave, even though the footsteps of death may have already gotten close.
ごめんなさい。ごめんなさい。
It seems the apology was directed at himself. That is enough. He could no longer apologize, but in exchange, this woman had done it for him. Only one concern remained. He had to release this beautiful bird back to where it came from.
キャスター。
the woman would by no means leave him. When he could no longer see anything, in the interval when he would allow for everything.
いいからもう行きなさい。君はこんなところにいてはいけない。
Feeling more peaceful than he ever had, he told the woman who clung to his remains. Where the woman who was left took off to is already a distant story. The woman was not what he thought her to be. The conclusion was not one he had hoped for. The story of the fallen killer and the witch ends here. If there was any salvation, it was in the brief instant after they had met. The life that lasted less than a month was filled with many times more humanity and tranquility than what had existed up until then. Dizziness overcame her, as if having seen a fragmented dream. The witch in the black cloak is liberated from the evening rain. She narrowed her eyes at the slight vertigo and looked up at the gloomy sky.
できっこないことを言われても羽なんて初めからありはしなかった。
But surely he saw her that way until the end. Even if she had fallen to the ground, her wings were light. Someday they would slough off the dirt and return to the skies.
ほんと気の回らない人。立ち寄った場所を気に入って空を忘れる渡り鳥だっているでしょう。そんな都合のいいことを思いもしなかったの。
She smiles ever so slightly at the monologue. As if drifting off to sleep, the witch slowly closes her eyelids. As if to bury herself in the short-lived dream. She held tightly onto this moment from which she will eventually awaken. This is yet another fragment. A fragment that has already passed on, broken into pieces, and, after faltering for a brief moment within the heart of the bearer, ceases to resist and simply flows away. So that with only the mind she could not exist, and with only the body she could not leave footprints. At the very least, the spring that did not come could be admired, unbeknownst to others, at this paradise of a town.